let's just dive in there. The question I'll start with is, because I get a lot of mixed reactions, it seems, right now about just the notion of employee engagement. It seems to me like there's a lot there's become sort of a heightened awareness of the importance of engagement, whatever that is. But I'm curious, with your member companies and the research you guys are doing, where are organizations right now? Where are we with engagement? What's both in terms of understanding, I think in terms of execution internally, what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I think it's such a critical question because we look at engagement in multiple ways. So one is to the point of what is its impact, right? So clearly, and I mean, just to throw it out there, right? All of our research shows strong correlation to market performance, right? The higher level of the engagement. So let's just say that that's table stakes, and there are leaders out there that don't see that, and that's a communications issue, right? Or a trust and data issue that companies have to overcome. So last week we just published a new study to our members on what we call culture renovation, because what we found is that the organizations that are actually, people use transformation, and that's the wrong term, because it literally is just trying to keeping the right elements, the strong elements, those that are really, that your organization needs to revere, and then you find and focus on just a few things that you want to change in order to get to where you want, right?
Perfect sense.
Yeah, and it's a lot more digestible in the business as well versus transformation, crud. Where do we start? How long is this going to take, et cetera. But what was interesting is we were able to zero in, there were 348 organizations out of that massive data set that said that they would rate their culture transformation as being highly or very highly successful. That's a small percentage, right, out of the large data set. And so, but when we looked at the 348, there were really strong commonalities to them. One of the things that we asked them is how do you measure the overall health of your culture? What are the mechanisms to do that? And 9 out of 10 of those organizations said we use our employee engagement survey data to do that, or as part of it. 9 out of 10 of every organization, those that had bad transformations, those that aren't even going through a transformation, when we ask them how they measure their org's health, they use their employee engagement data. The problem, though, is that it's limited. We actually view that as a false proxy in and of itself of organizational health. Because what our research found is that there's no statistical relationship between using employee engagement data and whether the transformation of a company's health or culture is successful or not, whether their 5-year growth trends in revenue, profitability, customer satisfaction, and market share went up or not. There's no correlation. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that it's one of many things. But the few things that matter, there were 2 things that stood out, and that's always-on feedback technology and internal and external social sentiment. So what we look at is, and what our research has been showing, is that high performance organizations are looking and saying the employee engagement survey as is, the annual, semi-annual, all employee survey, some organizations want to continue to do it because it's important for benchmarking themselves, which is fine. But it's not sufficient in that it's not providing the real-time analysis of what happens. So what our research clearly shows is that, employee engagement's fluid. Really? Exactly. And so I think the big takeaway that we're seeing is that these organizations increasingly are moving towards more always-on, frequent technology so that they can then analyze that, provide that back to the very people whose job it is to drive engagement, which mainly it's the line leaders, right? The people who are managing, who are trying to give constructive, forward-looking feedback. So that's, I hope I am answering your question.
So is the always-on, when you say the always-on kind of real-time feedback, is that like pulse technologies, that's the organization asking for feedback from the employee about their work experience, however that looks, or is it also I guess the first thing I just want to be clear that that's what you're talking about versus always on performance feedback where managers and employees are talking about work performance. Is that those are two separate things?
No, it's one of the same.
Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
we're just calling it a listen. It's a part of an overarching listening strategy.
Okay.
And more, as we all know, right? You've got to, and we use the analogy in this article I wrote recently. It's just like, hey, with all the stuff from the Me Too situation, look at all the CEO issues that have come forth, right? From, Papa John's to Wynn to Harvey Weinstein to CB, you name it, right? What if that's masking something that's vastly more dangerous to a company? That abhorrent behavior at the CEO level, inexcusable, and they've been rightly punished, and the company's balance sheets show it, right? At least short term. But we believe that, and think about what you're seeing from, we don't buy into generational stereotypes. Our research doesn't show that, right? However, there's a lot of generational data out there that shows that people want more and more feedback increasingly, right? Sure. They want to have a voice. We all want to have a voice. We all want to feel included, right? We all want to feel like we have a say in something. And, but oftentimes, there's employee sentiment that's not being discovered. And if you take a look at a traditional employee engagement survey, we did a survey recently about the employee engagement survey. Okay. And one of the things that, a couple data points that came out of that is that 73% of organizations use only that survey, or that survey is their only means to identify employee sentiment. And then 95% of the questions in a typical employee engagement survey are quantitative, multiple choice, Likert scale responses. But the real juice is in the qualitative.
Sure.
And with the advancement of natural language processing and machine learning, there's so many mechanisms right now for companies to be able to really capture that real authentic voice and interpret that into meaningful insights, and then use that to come back to the line leaders and to the business as a whole and say, hey, we're either on course or off course, here's how to course correct.
So that raises a question for me, because we sort of, as you were answering this, we certainly got into, when you talk about engagement, so often the organizations sort of immediately go to thinking about engagement through the lens of, well, it's our engagement survey, right? That becomes the proxy for engagement work. And then that lends ourselves to thinking about, well, to fix that, we need to go to other technology, right? Other technology solutions, which technology is great, but I wonder, what are you seeing in terms of how your organizations that you're studying are balancing out technology as the solution versus process versus people interventions versus what does that look like? Where are they at?
That's an important question. I don't know. I don't have a data point that I can share with you, but what I do know is this: we did a significant study with the University of Southern California Center for Effective Organizations that we published last summer, and it was all on performance feedback. And we were looking at performance management because so many companies, right? They're, boards are saying, hey, make some changes, or what are you doing about this? I read this article here, and or a CEO might come down and say, hey, I had lunch with this other CEO. They just dropped ratings. What are we doing about that? Right. Those are all the wrong questions, right? But what our research found in that particular study, and I'm going to get to your question, which is what's the balance between technology and the process, right? The research found that the only thing that mattered, that made any difference on ROA, ROE, ROI, any financial measure, was when organizations are hook, line, and sinker bought into being able to hire people in, develop people, reward people, monitor whether this is done, measure whether this gets done, and develop people all around giving quality, forward-looking, developmentally oriented feedback. Not enough organizations do that. So the middle within organizations is the greatest risk, I believe personally, and I think our research would validate this, our research validates this, is right at the middle layer. These people have been promoted in many instances because they were the top performer, right, as an individual contributor. They weren't brought in because of their ability to lead people, have quality conversations, and the development just isn't there. So companies are looking at a dual approach. They need to strengthen the process piece, which is the performance feedback, the really focusing on the what and the how. It's not just promoting people around, hey, you were the top performer, but it's rewarding people and promoting people and putting them in succession pipelines because of, yeah, you're good at what you do, but how you go about doing it enables our business to achieve what we want, a more collaborative environment, a more inclusive work environment that really unleashes the power of diversity, the ability to work better in teams, let's say. And that is critical, and that's a major area that needs to be strengthened. The listening strategy piece also needs to be strengthened, but so it's a combination, Jason, that I would say.
Okay, got it.
Does that answer your question?
It does. So give us that, because I know how as you take this research and you'll drive it towards some recommendations for organizations. So for organizations that are thinking about this, that are really trying to move the needle on creating a better employee experience that drives improved performance outcomes, what are the top couple of recommendations that you're putting forth right now to your members?
Well, I think it's really important that, first off, organizations need to be able to understand what their culture is versus what they desire it to be. And their culture is in the narrative of their employees. Sure. So it's how the employees internally and externally are talking about their business. Sure. And most companies haven't a clue.
Sure.
And so you really need to understand what it is versus what you want it to be. Because until you have that, you can't make any course corrections that are even credible, right? And what's beautiful about understanding what it is you're bringing the voice of your people into the fold. So you're getting them to contribute, to have that buy-in, to feel included in what it is, which a derivative of that is a more highly engaged person, right, in that regard. Yep. So the first step is to really understand what your culture is and what people are talking about. Because so tied to culture is the employer brand.
Right.
So the employer, right? And so the employer brand is how people actually experience your organization. Do you even know what that is, right? And so I would say start with that. Try to understand what that is. Another component is, we like to say from our research, most business leader out there know they want engagement, they know that it matters, but they have no clue as to how to drive it or what it means really at the end of the day.
Exactly right.
And so what I would also suggest is define what engagement means to your business. Because if you're measuring it, are you measuring the right things? And if you don't understand what it is, and you go to a leader and say, hey, your engagement scores dropped, we really need you to boost them. What does that mean?
Right.
What actions am I supposed to take, right, that come out of that? So I believe that those are two very important things to put in place before you start acting on anything else. I feel like once an organization understands the culture is so critical, and other research besides ours, research that looks at boards of directors, let's say, clearly shows, from the National Association of Corporate Directors,
sure,
the boards want evidence, hard evidence, routine evidence from senior management on quantitative and quantitative evidence of the health of the firm's culture. Okay, so that's going to be increasingly more important. So you better understand what it is you want, and then figure out from an engagement piece, what that means to you so that you can figure out what the derivatives are. But I would also say, universally, if an organization's saying, you know what, we are in desperate need, we need to do something right now because we're in a bad situation, our research clearly points to the quality of the feedback, the quality and the frequency of good feedback. If an organization's basically saying, hey, we're in desperate mode, what's like one thing we can do right now that really makes a big difference? It's around the feedback.
Sure.
Frequency, quality of that feedback.
Got it. That's awesome. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, my
Thanks,
friend.
Kevin.
All
Always.
right.
Man,